Meeting of the Minnehaha Creek Watershed District Board of Managers, November 7, 2019. All managers are present except Manager Hejmati and Manager Loftus, who will be with us shortly. Is there any member of the public who wishes to address the board in a matter that's not on the agenda? Come on forward. Feel free to take a seat here. The green means that mic is on. And if you'll start with your name and address.
My name is Richie Anderson. I live at 3205 Crystal Bay Road in Orono, Wayzata mailing address. I am here tonight to I got to get the terminology correct, and so I'm going to just, if you don't mind, I own two marinas in Lake Minnetonka, one of which half of it is on Tanager Bay. I've been interested in this Long Lake sub-watershed district stuff that you guys are exploring with City of Orono, Long Lake, Medina, and so I am the new LMCD board rep for Orono, and but I've been interested in this thing before I became that before I got that position, and the thing I want to explore possibly is we have land on Tanager Bay that we're not using, and I went up and saw a project that WSB, Pete Willenbring is the owner of that company, Willenbring S&B, whoever that is, but they have an iron enhanced filter system that they started in Circle Pines to take the water out of a semi-quasi holding pond that looks like schmeg, and they run it through a filter. They pump it in, and they have an iron, I call it a sandbox, but it's an iron enhanced sand filter, this big thing. And I know that they, back in the day, I met Pete, I was running the Wayzata Yacht Club, and he was doing this alum thing, I guess, to take the phosphorus out, and then it deposited in the bottom of Holding Pond. And I know they did a big Richfield project, and I read that wasn't all that successful yet. But this iron filter thing is they pump the water in. It's really cool. They got this pipe system that comes around. Water runs into this sand filter, and the water. I was there when they started it up. Water coming out. It's pretty crystal clear. Now, this is exploratory at this point, but I have this property that I would be interested in doing a private-public project with if it's something that maybe fits, and the property's on Tanager Bay. So, I'm just kind of throwing that out there for, entertaining thoughts. We don't have to do that right now, obviously, but I just want to let you know that, I'm interested in this Long Lake watershed thing, and I know you're exploring that, and who knows what you come up with, but it's a thought, and maybe we explore that future, whatever. But so I'm just throwing that out there, just for thought.
Okay, well, Mr. Whisker, first I want to say congratulations on your appointment to LMCD, but I think that we could probably have a conversation, Mr. Anderson, at staff level.
Absolutely. We'll follow up offline. We chatted briefly in the hallway, and we'll report back.
I mean, who knows where things go, right? But it's just something I've been thinking about. I've been thinking about this property. That's why I went up and took a look at this new concept they have up in Circle Pines, trying to do the same kind of thing I'm thinking that you guys are doing, trying to, the end result is Tanager Bay, where, I've got dock slabs. I don't live on Tanager Bay. I think it's getting cleaner, but the fact of the matter is, if you're exploring the possibility of it not getting cleaner, it probably isn't. But anyway, so just some food for thought.
Nice to capture the idea. Thank you, Mr. Anderson.
So you're the Gabe of the Lower Lake?
What's that?
You're Gabe of the Lower Lake?
No. Gabe and I are on the same Lower Lake.
Any other member of the public? No. Yes? Then we'll move on to the consent agenda. And the items on the consent agenda are approval of the October 24th, 2019 board minutes.
Madam President?
Yes.
I don't approve the agenda yet.
Thank you for catching me on that one. Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Manager Miller, Manager Rognan second. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, now I can talk about the consent agenda. Thank you. Approval of the October 24th board minutes and 3 resolutions. 19092, authorization to release an RFQ for professional services for engineer and government relations. 19.093, authorization to solicit quotes for water quality lab analysis. And 19094, adoption of an interim maintenance protocol for the Minnehaha Preserve Boardwalk. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda? Manager Hijmati, is there a second?
Second.
Manager Rognus? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? President's report, I attended a couple of meetings last week. One was about CAC, with the CAC leadership, a quarterly meeting that Mr. Whisker has with them. And the other was the board liaisons on the strategic communications, both of which were briefed in OPC today, so I won't go through any content. Manager Loftus, Operations and Programs Committee report.
Thank you, Madam President. We had 2 discussion items. The first you mentioned was strategic communications, which is a process the board's familiar with, but for anyone who isn't, gone out and sought external opinions on our communications, and we also received the insights from that tonight and some internal analysis as well. The next steps are structure and strategies will come back. Implementation ideas as well will come back in January. And then staff also gave us an update on the Citizen Advisory Committee. We have 3 positions who are not re-seeking appointments out of 13, so we'll be posting for applicants. If anyone is interested, please apply before the beginning of December. It's a 1-year appointment, and the CAC gets to discuss and influence all the same topics that the board does, so it's a great thing to consider if anyone's interested. Please apply.
Thank you. Are there any other meetings or events managers would like to report on? The upcoming meeting and event schedule is as printed, and again, a reminder that we're in November and December on an atypical schedule, so we're meeting on the 3rd Thursday of November, and then we're meeting on Tuesday, December 3rd. Not our usual process. We will go to the action items. 11.1 is Resolution 19065, authorization to transfer operating funds from the surety account. Ms. Reynolds and Mr. Dietrich.
Thank you, President White, managers. Tonight, staff is here asking for the board's approval and authorization to transfer funds from our surety account into our operating account. We have spent about the last year conducting a detailed audit of our surety account to make sure that we had the accountability of all the funds, and in doing so, we have located that there's $40,581.68 in the surety account that over the years should have been transferred over to our operating account. That money comes from various sources. On occasion, a permit applicant will pay their one check to pay their surety, their financial assurance amount, and then they will also pay their engineering reimbursements or postage reimbursements on that same check. Standard practice for us today is we would deposit that into their surety account and then transfer the portion that should be in our operating account over. And what we found through this audit was there was periods of times when that was not being done, and all of it was being put into the surety account and being held there. The other portion of those funds come from situations where we've gone out and we've conducted the final inspection and the assurance is ready to be released and returned to the applicant, but maybe they paid $2,000 in their financial assurance, and we release $1,500 back to them, and the remaining $500 is kept to pay those permitting fees, outstanding postage, engineering, legal, anything along those lines. And what we found is that we have situations where we return the money to the permittee, but we didn't transfer then our portion of those funds into the operating account. So at the conclusion of the audit, at this point, we have, like I said, $40,581.68 that we'd request the board's approval to transfer over as operating funds.
Thank you.
Questions?
Move approval.
Second.
Motion and second. Any questions for staff? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those who want to say thank you, please say aye. Next item is 19096, which is continuing on the policy. Go ahead.
All right. I will continue on, and as I said, brought Tom up here with us because this has been a joint project between operations and permitting as we kind of move through this and kind of go through this. But on this one, staff is requesting that the board adopt a policy that allows us to transfer the interest that is accruing on that surety account on an annual basis over to the operating account. So what we're looking at is at this year, in January of 2020, being able to take a look back at 2019 and say we've accumulated this much interest on the account. We've paid X amount in service fees and charges on the account. Maybe we pay monthly for a positive pay on it, and if you have to order checks, anything along those lines, and then deduct that out of the interest accrued, and then take that remaining balance and transfer it over into the operating account. That way we're paying any of the costs of the surety account and maintaining that surety account with the interest we're accruing, but we're not just leaving that interest in the account. The account started accruing interest in about September of 2017. We moved it into an interest-bearing account, and it has been accruing interest ever since. And currently we have about $31,000 in interest in there, and that doesn't have the fees that we've paid out of the account subtracted out. So what we're looking at is staff is recommending we adopt a policy that allows us to transfer that interest on an annual basis, minus any fees or charges that have been paid out of that interest accrued on the account.
Thank you. Is there a motion to adopt?
Move approval.
Manager Miller, is there a second?
Second.
Manager Olson. We normally do, I think it's January, do a funds transfer as a part, following the audit process. Would this be bundled with that?
That's a funds transfer to kind of balance out our year-end
Okay.
funds. And so what I'm looking at is this would transfer over kind of the 2019 interest accrued would transfer over and be part of the 2020 budget for permitting as revenue that goes into there. And then at year end, that could eventually, we'd make that kind of part of the budget planning revenue for permitting.
And this would just happen administratively?
Administratively, we would do it. So it wouldn't be part of the audit. We administratively do that as kind of our year end closeout procedures. That's for, well, kind of as the audit is coming in. But it would be part of kind of the next year's books.
Madam President,
Yes.
in the year-to-date budget for interest earnings, we had 45,000, and the actual's 85,000, so this 40 and 30 is addition to the 85?
The 85 that's on there, I believe is you're looking at that, is the general account only?
Yeah, I understand that, but it's interest
So-
earnings.
Yes, so
So
it'll
this
be
will be
additional.
additional interest earnings, okay.
Correct,
That wasn't figured into the budget for this year,
correct.
okay. Good.
Manager Loftus.
I apologize for the basic question, but is all of the incoming revenue into the surety account outside funds? It's no district money?
Correct. Everything that's held in the surety account is, as I coin it so we can keep it in our minds, is it's other people's money. It's other people's money that we're holding for their permit, for the course of the permit, and then at the end of the permitting process, they receive their money back, assuming they pass the final inspection with
And do
Tom's
they
team.
sign some sort of agreement upon depositing it?
Sorry to use the rare. Manager Loftus, they do sign an escrow agreement or it's a performance bond or letter of credit. All of it has a standard template that's associated with district language, and then there's the actual physical copy.
And have you checked with both accounting and legal that you're allowed to make interest off of their money and not have to return it to them?
Yes, we have. I verified with legal before we did this that by accruing the interest on it, that we were okay. And our escrow agreements indicate that it is a non-interest bearing. And so when they sign it, they understand that they're getting it and they will get back the same amount without any interest. And
Okay. Could we put a kind of a nexus to it where we say this interest is, transferred into the general fund, but it's, used to something that is also to the advantage of that same group of people. You know what I mean? So it feels a little more connected. So it's not just the district earning interest off of.
What Manager Loftus, yes. What we don't have in here is that, you know, I think when we transfer it and when we do the budgeting purposes, that interest, right now, the interest off the general fund gets budgeted in and is considered in on kind of the operations sub-fund for the general operations. I think in essence, this interest could go in and be part of that permitting fund and support the permitting fund and be kind of part of what's going into that. And then at year end, if there's the excess, then it would roll with accordance with our typical processes for fund balances at the end of the year.
And Manager Loftus, I'll just add too, as we kind of look at permitting's program alignment, and we're looking wholesale at our financial assurance rule, we can certainly look at incorporating language that would say just that.
Well, I think it's extremely cumbersome to calculate an individual's interests and get it back to them. However, I do see that it would make sense to align it to their benefit on the other side of the ledger as well.
Sure.
So that
And we can certainly look into that as we start
Yeah.
to look wholesale at our financial assurance rule.
Well,
Thanks, Manager Miller.
I get what you're saying, but they're making this deposit because to ensure that they complete the project according to the agreement. And
also pay for engineering, legal expenses. That also gets deducted out of there, correct?
It's an option, Manager Loftus, so we do charge reimbursement fees for private projects that incur engineering review fees or legal review fees. It is an option if somebody would prefer to have it deducted out of their financial assurance, but often we just get separate checks and then return the financial assurance.
so, I don't know. I think the concept is admirable that, you know, all the other taxpayers are paying for the services they're getting. They're not paying the total cost, they're just paying a fee. And, you know, everybody else is subsidizing our development in effect. So,
I think that's a valid point. I think
Yeah.
it would be
Oh.
noted in the transfer of, we believe this is offsetting,
okay.
you know, because I think in theory, the idea of earning interest off of, I don't know.
Manager Olson?
Question, if they hand you a check for that function, we put it into that account. What if they hand you a letter of credit?
Manager Olson, that's a great question. For all the letter of credits or the performance bonds that we get, those are held by Smith Partners. So those are mailed, certified mail and kept on file.
But there is no interest
No interest,
involved
no.
at that time, see?
I don't believe so.
No, there's no interest.
No, it just says that they are good for the money and we can get our hands on it if we require it.
Correct.
The letter of credit we can probably, but the bond, I would think we'd have more legal fees than
Sure.
we recover from the bonds.
Right.
Or don't you, you don't agree?
Mr.
Madam
Smith?
President, Manager Miller, typically, it usually only requires a letter to threaten to use the bond to obtain the action of compliance. So it's usually not a high cost.
Okay.
Any further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you.
Thank you.
Resolution 19097, Ms. Brown.
I just got one comment.
Go
It
ahead.
seems like every meeting we get more things straightened around in the organization. And it really feels good that continuing this improvement of this, of the management that we weren't aware it was in such need of examination, I guess is the best way to put it. So, thank you.
Go ahead.
Okay, thank you, President White and managers. The item before you tonight is the Wasserman Lake Park project. And specifically, I'm seeking the following actions. We're going to review and hopefully approve the 60% design plans for for the Wasserman Lake Park. And then we are also looking at the 90% boardwalk plans and seeking authorization to solicit bids for the boardwalk construction component of the Wasserman project. As the board is aware, we've been working on this project since 2017 when we negotiated a purchase agreement with a private landowner. And the acquisition of that property was contingent upon developing a concept plan with the City of Victoria and executing a cooperative agreement. More recently, in May of 2019, we negotiated a second cooperative agreement that delineated the terms of final design and construction for the park facilities. Specifically, it spelled out how the city and district would share in the costs of design for the whole park project, as well as the construction oversight contract. It spelled out the cost share for the park improvements, wherein the city would pay for all of the park improvements, including shelter, trails, boardwalk, and other amenities, and that the district would be paying for the site restoration elements and water quality enhancements. And then it also spelled out the terms of closing on the project, where upon awarding a bid for the park project, we would close with the city on the land, transferring title and retaining easement. Following the approval of that cooperative agreement, we ran an RFP process for design and brought Ane Fernandez Landscape Architects on board in August. And we have been working fast and furious to hit our deadline on 90% design for the whole site in December 2019, so that we're hitting an early 2020 bid window. Because of the condensed timeline for project completion and sort of the nature of some of the work that we need to do to achieve the project vision, we are breaking the project contracting into some discrete pieces to make sure that we can accomplish all of this work. So there are really three packages of work. The first is some winter oak pruning and some select removals. This is a quote package that we're developing and that we will run through our standard vegetation maintenance quote process. And that will come back for a contract award in early December of this year. The second piece is the boardwalk construction package that includes some tree removals on that island feature, which can't be accessed except for in winter conditions. And that is one of the components that we're seeking authorization to bid this evening. And then the final package are sort of all of the other site improvements that again would be coming forward for final design in December to bid early this year. So those are some of the discrete elements that we'll be looking at, and now I'm going to jump into the 60% design. Let me pull up a pointer here so I can walk us through it. So I'm sure everyone's relatively familiar with the concept plan, and I'll go into detail on each of these elements, but just to sort of get us oriented. As you come into the site off of County Road 43 here, you sort of snake through these two wetland lobes and come into the parking area. There's then bituminous trail that loops around this prairie knoll area that is one of our target restoration areas. And brings you into the shelter and pavilion, which is located on a bluff feature that has an overlook on Wasserman Lake. The children's play area, one of the two children's play areas, is located just adjacent to the shelter, and that's a nature play area. And then as you come out of this sort of knoll area, there are some natural surface trails, both on the downside of the bluff, as well as into this sort of peninsula area that also includes an open seating area and a second kind of minor children's play area. The peninsula then brings you to kind of the boardwalk intersection where you come over to the second plan. And then the boardwalk gets you out to what we call the island feature. It's really kind of an upland node within the wetland, and that's our primary point for lake access. So I'll walk through now these various items in a bit more detail. So for the access and parking component, we did meet with the county, and they will be providing an access permit for the project off of County Road 43 without making additional improvements on 43. That was something that we had talked about at committee. And so we'll be coming in off of that County Road 43. We do snake between this sort of these wetland lobes. There's a wetland here, and then the large wetland over here. And what you're seeing in blue is the buffer map for the site. And we aren't able to meet the district's buffer requirements in that sort of tight area. So we will be seeking an exception for the project. And the exception criteria will be met primarily by exceeding our stormwater standards for the stormwater treatment on site. The parking presently includes 32 paved parking spaces. This has largely been driven by staff and council, but there is some discussion about whether that's the right number to start with and whether they should potentially scale back on kind of the initial development and then have the flexibility to add spaces later on. One of the key kind of issues or questions that have come up throughout our design process has been from the residents that live in these homes here about how effectively they can be screened from the parking while also maintaining the lake views that they currently have. And so we've been working closely with the designer and communicating with the residents about how we can incorporate both kind of using the mass grading process and then also developing a robust planting plan to mitigate to the extent that we can the sort of view shed issue on site. The next piece that I'll go into is the shelter and play area. These are the most recent 3D renderings of the shelter, so this is what it looks like as of today. Again, the shelter is located in that bluff area. It features a four-season restroom, which is a priority of the city's. And right now we have picnic table seating for 50 under that shelter area. And then as you can see, there's also a big open pavilion area that accommodates other park users. It's designed to have flexibility for renting. So you have the restrooms kind of located in the middle here. And that allows users to potentially rent one side if it's a smaller group to allow other folks to use the shelter at the same time. In terms of materials, we're trying to be budget conscious and kind of use very basic materials. So we have a concrete brick, and there isn't a ton of kind of structure to the shelter overall. But then they're using these really sort of nice design touches throughout to kind of add a level of design detail to make it a really unique and pleasant place to be in.
Is that lighting that I'm seeing underneath there?
Yes, that is the lighting.
LED.
Yes.
Thank you.
So the next thing is the sort of play areas that I hit on before. Here you can see the play area in a sort of closer up perspective where it is relative to the shelter. So this square is the bathrooms. And so you're right adjacent to the shelter. This is sort of the gross motor area that includes sort of climbers and steppers, which I'll show a picture of in a moment. And then there's also this culvert feature, so it's kind of a crawl through culvert with some rock walls, boulder walls. And then there's also what they're calling sort of a log scramble that will go up and down this prairie mound and then tie right into this sort of prairie trail that will be mowed in up the site. So what that looks like, not in black and white plan set view, this is the 3D rendering of that play area. A really important feature of this is that all of these materials are being salvaged on site. So we'll talk about sort of the tree removal plan and approach, but all of these play features will come from the site. And the designers have gone so far as to identify the specific trees that are being incorporated in here and where they'll be cut and all of that level of detail. The other picture here is just an example of the loose parts play area. So this is something that's a little bit more informal, will be located in the peninsula area. And it's really just leaving some materials around to allow kids to build and sort of play and create structures. So less formal, but again, using those salvaged materials. The next piece is the lake access component. It's relatively straightforward. We've heard from residents that lake access is a priority. We initially had looked at 2 different areas, one being more kind of in the main area of the park, and then the other being off of this island feature. The one down by the shelter was found to be infeasible because it's incredibly shallow and doesn't have a lot of kind of recreational value. So we are prioritizing a dock coming off of this island feature here. We are currently looking at some prefabricated dock options and evaluating that with the design team. And the goal here is to have kind of a flex water access where you can accommodate fishing, you can accommodate kind of passive viewing and experience of the lake, and then potentially accommodating sort of a kayak-in feature where folks could launch off of the public dock that's north of the lake and kind of come into the site via kayak. The next element is the boardwalk piece, which is a really key feature of the site as it provides access to and through the wetland, as well as getting folks to that unique kind of island feature, and then of course being the connection point to that only lake access piece. I'm going to spend a little bit more time and more detail here because we are seeking that 90% approval this evening. So the boardwalk reach is about 450 feet from upland area to upland area. We are modifying our standard boardwalk design quite a bit to kind of work around some of the maintenance challenges that we have noted recently. Some of the main changes, and I'll show this again in picture view in a moment. So the sort of undercarriage area, the stringer area, this will all be galvanized steel. So, you know, typically we use wood stringers, so that's a significant change. And then the decking is a heavier duty 4x6 treated lumber, as opposed to, I think we have 2x6, is that correct? Yeah, 2x6 on the current boardwalk design. And then that decking material is bolted in directly to the stringers, so to those steel undercarriage I-beams. And so that allows for easier kind of movement and replacement if necessary. Another change is that there is no tow railing on this design. So it is just a low to the wetland, no more than 30 inches above the wetland, and will kind of give people sort of direct access into the wetland. There's really sort of a connection between where you are on the boardwalk and into that wetland area. So what this actually looks like, here's the sort of stringer area. So this is the same design that we'll be featuring. You can see where the I-beam comes in, where the decking connects into those stringers, and then the decking here is actually, I think these are 2x6s, and we understand that this year they're going to be replacing all the decking with the 4x6 that we're using. And then here it is, kind of from above. Again, not the same decking material, but similar in sort of design and feel. Next, I'm going to go into the restoration design. So.
Can I just ask a question at this point?
Manager Miller, go ahead.
You're just having us look at this, we're not approving it. You obviously had the citizens in the city and everybody else involved. You're just informing us, you're not asking any opinions, right?
So I am seeking approval of the 60% plans, but everything will, oh, sorry. Well, two things. The 60% plans we're seeking approval for. On the boardwalk, we are seeking 90% design approval and authorization to bid the boardwalk component of the park.
I understand that, but the design has already been reviewed and approved by the citizens' involvement and the
Oh,
city
sure.
and everybody else. And you're just telling us what it is, you're not.
Effectively, yes, Manager
Okay,
Miller.
That's fine,
Okay.
I understand. Thank you.
So then on the restoration design component, again, this is the area where the district's investment is going in the site. And as we discussed last time, the restoration strategy on site is really opportunistic and inclusive of several different features and areas across the site. So the first piece is the Prairie Knoll, which is labeled with the A here. And that's an area that we are targeting for pretty traditional prairie restoration. So the area will be seeded with a prairie plant mix, and then also we'll be planting some plugs for quick establishment. That area of the park will have a mowed trail, and that both provides access into the prairie area, but also makes it sort of a controlled access so that folks are sort of not disturbing the rest of the prairie planting. The other piece of the restoration design is sort of opportunistic wetland enhancement, primarily along the wetland fringe. So in these areas labeled as C. And what we're doing here is really looking at those areas that are currently dominated by reed canary grass and coming in to establish a mesic meadow edge. And there will also be some tree removal in the area, and we'll be leaving some deadfall to create some additional habitat in those wetland edges. The oak savanna component is the area labeled as B, and that really becomes a hallmark of the overall site restoration plan and the experience of the site. So this site has many specimen oak trees that up until 20 to 30 years ago were sort of the primary tree species on site. And they've since been sort of crowded out by ash and box elder. So we'll be removing some of those emergent trees in the oak areas to reestablish understory growth and then improve the health of those existing oak trees. And then the final component of the restoration is the stream channel restoration. So the stream channel is located along the southern edge of the property, the area the area identified with a D. And this stream channel has experienced significant down cutting, and it's transporting sediment to Lake Wasserman. So the goal here is to really stabilize the banks and just reestablish sort of a natural flow of that intermittent stream. We'll be accomplishing this by installing a single FES lift and sort of grading back the bank, and then replanting the bank with some stabilizing vegetation. We'll also be introducing some of these rock weir structures at areas where they're already naturally forming to slow the flow of water and create some sort of pool systems in that channel. I wanted to put a little bit of a finer point on the tree removal piece because that is something that we've seen become controversial in our own projects or really across the metro area. So the goals for the tree removal component are to remove all of the ash except those that are eligible for treatment. So that's driven both by a desire to reestablish that oak savanna, but it's also a desire from the city because it's so ash dominated to sort of get in front of the EAB issue and remove those trees. They are looking at some specimen ash trees that they think would be candidates for investment by the city. So the removal numbers on ash may go down as the design advances. We're also, again, looking to open up the understory in some of those wooded areas, especially where we're looking to create that oak savanna condition. And finally, looking to manage the oaks for health and then hazard prevention. So the total large trees, or trees over 4-inch DBH on site, are 308. There's 142 trees currently slated for removal, and again, that might go down as we look more deeply at the ash trees. Of those removals, 93 are ash, and then 30 are what I'm calling strategic oak removal. So there are a couple of oak, young oak knolls where you have a lot of young oaks competing for sunlight. So we'll be going in and taking out some of those to allow kind of the healthier tree specimens to thrive. And then the remaining removals are largely attributed to construction removal. We're also looking through that oak work to clean about 30 of the large specimen oaks with some select pruning. And then the planting plan currently has more than total replacement of those removals, with 178 trees going in as well as 181 shrubs. One component of the boardwalk piece is going to be to access the island feature and do some of the island tree removals now. So the island is almost entirely ash, but we need to maintain some of the canopy, so we're taking more of a 50% removal approach on the island to create some of that light penetration and improve the understory growth. And again, these removals are planned to be part of the boardwalk bid package. And then the other piece of the winter oak removal is, again, that winter oak management, primarily happening on the peninsula. And the reason that this work has to advance now is because oak trees are particularly vulnerable to oak wilt. So we need to get that done in frozen conditions. Oh yeah, and then I just had a picture of kind of how they're delineating the way that some of these oaks that are being removed will be salvaged to incorporate into play features. So the park or the project budget, as we discussed in committee, the city budget for this work was originally $2.1 million, which included the contingency. This budget was set based on the original concept plan and costing it out in May of 2018. As we've discussed, the sort of delay in construction timing has led to some not insignificant cost increases. We've seen the costs for the park go up about 20%. And so we're currently working with the city to figure out sort of how they want to manage that budget increase and how they want to proceed with the work. Because of meeting timings, we're having that conversation on Tuesday. So the work the discussion that we have tonight is sort of contingent upon where that goes on Tuesday. And then the district budget for our portion of the work is an additional $300,000 for restoration. And that does not include the $90,000 in clean water funds that we leveraged into the pond treatment and cleanup. The cost estimates for the winter work. So the winter oak work is primarily a district project as part of that overall restoration work, and the cost estimate for the district portion is about $37,000. There is a portion of this project that we would allocate to the city, and that's the salvage work. Because the tree salvage is being incorporated into the play features and other features of the site, that ends up being a city expense. And then the cost estimate for the boardwalk and tree removal component is $380,000 for the city. And then there is a portion allocated to the district, as we intend to sort of cost share on most of the site's tree removal.
The 37,000 and the 17,000, are they part of that 300,000 you just showed in the previous slide?
Manager Olson, they would be part of that
Thank you.
30,000.
Yep.
So I wanted to have a quick discussion about contingency planning before we go into the discussion about the design. So again, like I just said, the approvals this evening are contingent on the city also deciding to advance the boardwalk bid for winter construction. My understanding is that City Council really does want to get this work done, but there's, some nerves about the budget increase that could, lead to some delays in that construction package. There's also some risk associated with advancing the boardwalk early and in advance of the rest of the park. As we discussed at committee, under the cooperative agreement, when the total design package comes forward, if the bid exceeds 10% of the engineer's estimate, the city council could reject all bids and essentially terminate the project at that point. If they were to advance the boardwalk and then sort of exercise that option, they would have essentially started to build boardwalk on property that we might eventually own. There isn't a huge risk to us in that case financially, but there would be sort of a ownership or liability question, and we would, potentially own a partially constructed boardwalk. And then the other sort of piece of the contingent.
Can you clarify that? I'm a little confused by.
Sure. So essentially, we're advancing a small portion of the project, and the construction for that boardwalk piece could begin before we have awarded bid for the rest of the project. So if the city council did not elect to award the bid for the remainder of the project, they would have basically started to construct boardwalk on property that we may retain title for. So we would sort of own the boardwalk, I suppose, or it would be sort of a complicated ownership structure. They would still be responsible for the payment for the boardwalk, but we would have city boardwalk on our land.
Thank you.
And then a final sort of piece of contingency planning, if we were to not advance the boardwalk, it would be at least a staff recommendation that we pursue the winter oak work regardless. It's sort of the right thing to do from a natural resource perspective. And it also is a really key piece to advance before the remainder of the park construction because of that big salvage component. So there would be sort of a potential upfront investment by the district with uncertainty on sort of the ultimate park outcome. So things are going to move fast and furious from now through December. So again, the city council meeting is happening on Tuesday. And if they authorize the release for the boardwalk bid, we would be releasing the RFP for the boardwalk and the RFQ for the winter oak work the next day, so that we can bring it back to the board at our first meeting in December for contract award, and then the first city council meeting in December for their approval. And then we're also looking at this point at about a month turnaround for the 90% approval, and would then be seeking to bid the project beginning of January to award the contract in February. So I'm sure there are questions, but again, we're seeking approval of the 60% design plans this evening, and then the approval of the 90% boardwalk plans and authorization to solicit bids contingent upon concurrence by City Council.
Thank you, Ms. Brown. Is there a motion to adopt the resolution?
I'll move approval.
Manager Olson, is there a second?
Second.
Manager Maxwell. Questions for Ms. Brown?
I believe this is probably the city's responsibility, because is this whole park handicap accessible?
Manager Maxwell, there are pieces of the site that are natural surface trail, so I'm not sure that would meet ADA requirements, but the, all
Playground.
the bituminous is ADA, all of the shelter is ADA, the boardwalk would be ADA. So all the elements that we can bring into compliance with ADA would be.
All right, thank you.
Andrew Olson?
Two questions. How wide is that? Okay, so, question number one. You said that there's going to be a direct access to the county road, and it's not going to be required that we have that pull-off entrance?
Sure, Manager Olson, there was some discussion about whether our access permit would be predicated on a turn lane, and the county's not going to require that. So we'll come off of County Road 43 without that turn lane.
Okay, then once you turn in, how wide is that? It looked pretty narrow. It looked like the width of a car.
Manager Olson, it's two 10-foot lanes that come in. So there is,
20 foot.
and then there's, I think it's a 2-foot shoulder as well.
Okay. And you maintain that 2-foot shoulder through the pinch point where the wetland is?
Yes.
Okay. Wow. Thank you.
Other questions? Ms.
One
Brown?
other one. Would
Ms.
we take out all the,
Andrews?
excuse me,
Yeah, go ahead.
would we take out all the ash trees at the same time we're taking out, thinning out the oaks during the winter?
Manager
only one
Maxwell, there was a lot of discussion about whether we should advance all of the tree work along with the oak removal. Ultimately, were just more decisions that need to be made about the extent of ash removal and how some of the other tree removal plays into the overall park plan. And so we weren't quite able to pull the trigger on that piece on the same timeline. So all of that will be part of the rest of the park package.
Thanks.
Manager Brogdon?
The drawings that show the shelter, they appear to be rather flimsy structures. And, is that the nature of the 60% drawing at this point? It isn't convincing structurally.
Manager Rognus, there is a lot of detail behind those 3D renderings. They have addressed the sort of footings for the shelter. They've addressed the materials.
I've seen that.
Right.
But the 3D sketches don't really, they're not convincing to me, I guess.
Yeah, I think there are limits to how much you can portray in those kind of built-in models, but it's really just meant to kind of give a sense of place and the way that the shelter will sort of sit on the site.
Manager Olson?
The last question is use of lighting at night. Is it the city's intention to leave lights on or turn them off, or what do we have in
Sure.
mind?
Manager Olson, it's an ongoing discussion with the city. It's one of those things we hear from residents, well, we don't want lights on, but then for safety, we want some lights on, and so it's sort of a work in progress. I know they won't keep it fully lighted, but there will probably be some dim site lighting at all times.
Okay. Because in the wintertime when the leaves are down, you don't want to have a pile of white light come into your bedroom window in the middle of the night.
I believe that those kind of lake-facing lights would be off when the park closes.
Thanks.
Manager Miller?
Yeah, following this development, it's easier to follow Midwest and Middle East peace talks. This is, I'm really confused where we are. This isn't our first outing. We did Cottageville Park, and we had great understanding with the city what was going to be accomplished and when it was going to be done and who was going to pay for what. And same with this Arden Park, which was ongoing. I have no idea where we are in this project in terms of ultimately getting the city's approval and getting it funded and getting it done. Manager Olson, are you satisfied that everything's in place to?
I am satisfied that everything's in place in terms of the city council's level of decision-making at this time. And we are rushing them because we're trying to get to a build schedule. So as Ms. Brown was talking about approvals next Tuesday, we do have to go through that. So it's sort of us deciding, yes, we're accepting the 60%, and yes, we're going to 90 on just the boardwalk. And we are willing to go out for bids.
Contingent on the council acting on Tuesday.
Correct.
Okay.
And if they decide not to, then that all
Okay.
doesn't happen.
All right.
Can I ask follow up on that? So I understand, completely get why you've packaged it the way you have. Winter work that needs to get done can't be put off, and then timing of bids and everything, but, so I don't have a problem with it, but when we talked about it last time at committee, were we supposed to know from the city by now? Did they miss one of their decision dates that we were counting on, or have we always known it wouldn't happen until next week and we just, got to the detailed part where, okay, we need to back this up and there's a little bit of risk with it? I guess I couldn't
Yeah.
follow it close enough to whether one of those dates passed
Sure,
and we
no.
still didn't get a clear answer, or if we're just moving things because of winter work and
Yes,
that kind of
good question, Manager Loftus. So when we brought that presentation to committee, we brought essentially the same presentation to council, I think, right afterwards.
Yeah.
And that was the first opportunity that we were presenting the sort of change in budget and what's happened with sort of the project inflation over time. So they also were kind of getting that information and reacting to the information at the same time. And then because our turnaround is so quick, they weren't prepared to say what they wanted to do that night. And so now they're essentially having to decide what they want to do about the budget increase at the same time that we're releasing the project for bid. So, I mean, I think it's a little bit, we're just sort of a victim of needing to advance this quickly and make a lot of decisions at once. And it sort of requires everyone to be nimble. I'll say too, we often with projects like this do look to hear from City Council before we're bringing action before the board. But again, just timing and the way that meetings have fallen out, we at sort of a staff level decided to just kind of plow everything forward and keep advancing on the same schedule until something tells us that we have to act differently. So.
Their election called off one of their meetings, wasn't it? That's why they went back 1 week.
I'm not sure, Manager Maxwell. The meeting schedules with them being on a Monday, it just sometimes aligns better than others, but I'm not sure.
Are there any of those small oaks on that island so that when you thin out the ash tree, some of those might get a chance to grow?
President White, I think that the island is almost entirely ash.
Okay.
There really aren't any small oaks. At this point, we haven't talked about sort of what the replanting of the island might look like. But yeah, if we removed every ash tree on that island, it would look bare. That it really is just an ash-dominated area.
And will there be access to the stream channel? You can walk down there.
President White, yes, there is a trail tie-in to actually the community on the other side of the creek channel. So the trail from the park will come down through the creek channel, and then that will also create access to that restored creek area.
Nice. Manager Miller?
Can we get a little bit of context of where this fits in the total scheme of the trails and other efforts that we have initially looked at, not necessarily engaged in a plan yet, but how it fits into a major master plan?
Sure, Manager Miller. There's a couple of pieces of that. One, let me see if I have a map that illustrates this well. So that might be the one to use. So this is County Road 43 here. There are neighborhood trails through the neighborhoods to the south. And then there's also neighborhood trails throughout the neighborhoods in the north. So this section of the road represents a pretty significant trail gap in the city's overall system. Because of the grade, you really can't snake a trail in on the side of the property that we own. But when the property over here develops, which it's it's a sort of remnant ag parcel at the edge of development, the plan would be to put regional trail on that side of the road. And then that would probably tie in across 43 either into our site or into the neighborhood here. And then again, our site ties into trail. This is that sort of trail access piece that I was looking at. So that's one component, but then in sort of the scheme of the Western Growth Area planning, we really see this as kind of a catalyst project as the growth momentum does start to move west. And this becomes a piece of kind of that greenway system as development moves out towards Pearson and kind of through these new developing parcels.
Well, the thing that, if I could, this is a pretty important project. If we're gonna, if this is gonna be the model for the quality and the comprehensive work that we're doing with the city and the whole Western Growth Area. So if this thing falls apart, we're in effect somewhat abandoning our whole master plan. Okay.
One piece of it.
No, you know, if
It's a keystone.
it's a critical piece, and it's you know, how many we've been working on this? How many years now?
About 2 years.
3 years, and we're still at a maybe scheme. I'm really concerned that, but for the overruns, we probably wouldn't, if we had a timely decision-making process, we wouldn't have an overrun because the construction bids wouldn't be subject to the inflation that we've had. So it's, at least I'm pretty concerned about the long-term effect of this is going to have on our plans for the whole region if this doesn't get approved.
I maintain optimism.
Okay.
It's a substance, of course.
We'll do our part to move it forward.
Yeah. Mr. Whisker?
President White, managers, just one brief note and follow-up to Manager Miller's concern is that my understanding that Anna is planning either this month or I think this month to come back to committee, and that'll be an opportunity. We'll have more information very quickly coming out of City Council, and she's coming back to frame some, corridor planning interest around other parcels that we've been looking at. So we'll have an answer shortly, and you'll be able to discuss that in context of the overall master planning, I think probably by the end of the month. So.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else for Ms. Brown? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you.
Thank you.
Item 12.1 is a discussion item, the fishing contract with commercial fishermen. Mr. Langdon.
President White, managers, thank you for the opportunity to come discuss with you fishing contract with commercial fishermen. Tonight I'm going to spend just a brief moment orienting you where we are with our 6 Mile Creek carp management process, but really keying in on the carp removal phase of that project, highlighting the challenges and pursuit of specifically commercial fishing efforts that we've experienced today, and then also ultimately proposing a solution or a hopeful solution to those conflicts, and currently not seeking any action, but hopefully coming to the board soon with action. If you direct your attention to the screen, I've outlined the 6 Mile Creek Halsteads Bay watershed. So going into this entire sub-watershed, a study came out suggesting the impact of common carp on the entire watershed. The district pursued a Lessard Sams Outdoor Heritage Fund grant in 2017 and was awarded that grant in 2018. The grant was quite sizable and took a very holistic approach to managing carp within the 6 Mile Creek subwatershed. Specifically, that grant highlighted 3 different phases to deal with the carp. One aspect of that was to limit carp recruitment. Carp recruitment is this idea that if we were to go in and remove all the adults, you have young carp that can hatch, survive, and then replenish the adults. We want to prevent that from happening. So efforts to put in barriers and aeration, the power to put in aeration, went into the watershed, along with the second phase kind of to prevent the migration. If they can't get there, can't move around, they can't cause problems once we remove them out of certain areas. So the map now displays kind of the different areas in which we believe carp are still able to move, but it's taken an entire watershed and broken it down into more manageable, say, sub-carp management units across that watershed. The last item is, now that we've prevented recruitment, or are preventing and preventing the migration, is to actually get in and remove those adult carp. So to dive into that, I've put together 4 different videos here. So these are 4 different techniques that are commonly used to try to reduce carp. The first, directing your attention to the stream trapping. For President White and the managers that were able to go on the recent tour, I believe you stopped by the Highland Barrier. Here you can see carp literally trying to jump over that barrier. So stream trapping is one method. When we see carp in these situations, we can go out and remove them, but this requires the carp to be in that location. The second video here is a video of box netting. So those that were able to come out and see Chase and myself at Parley Lake, this is the box netting that occurred this summer on that lake. You can see quite a substantial effort to lift all those carp into the boat. And the last effort is seining. On the top we have open water seining. On the bottom we have winter seining. This technique utilizes commercial fishermen. They have very large nets. They deploy them in certain manners that, if effective, can collect a significant amount of carp. So to date, what has been the impact of removals and the efforts that we've pursued? On the previous slide, I highlighted the fact that we pursued a significant effort of box netting within Parley Lake. Across the summer, contracted parties removed roughly 2,000 carp, which equated to 10,000 kilograms or close to 25,000 pounds of common carp. It's a pretty significant number or volume, but if I can direct your attention to the graphic on the far right, you can see carp density along the axis. That green and blue line, that's kind of the target range of where we would like to be. And you can see, even though we removed that many carp within Parley, that the 2 bars, sorry, I should also orient, the gray bar is pre-removal efforts, the white bar is post-removal efforts. So even removing that amount of pounds of carp has led to very small increments in terms of gain of where we want to be in this subwatershed. So we stepped back and we kind of looked at all options at the table. Each method truly has its strengths and weaknesses. As I highlighted with the stream trapping, that requires us to actually see the carp. It requires them to be migrating through that area, so we can't pursue it at all cases. Box netting, in the case of Parley and Mud, when you have such high densities of carp, it might not be the method that can try to capture all of them at once. Where the seining methods pose their own challenges, but something that we want to try to look into a little bit more. The other item I really want to highlight here, though, is not all options are suited for all lakes. Some lakes carp have gotten into historically, and they're not moving around, so that eliminates the ability to stream trap. Some lakes drop off too deep from the shoreline, therefore box netting isn't effective. So there's all these factors that we're considering, but ultimately view it that the district could greatly benefit from seining as a solution. Seining typically tries to target high abundance lakes, and it can also be used in lakes where carp aren't migrating. The outstanding question is, will commercial fishermen work with us or not? I've been informed this is not a new concept to everybody here, but I'll remind everybody that commercial fishing in the state of Minnesota, they are entitled to certain territories. So in other words, they have a monopoly over fish removed at large scales, such as all these efforts that I've demonstrated. So we're kind of constrained to working with them. The Minnesota Association of Watershed Districts, or MAWD, and other entities the district included in that were supporters of legislation to try to alter or change how we have to kind of go through commercial fishermen to do any of these efforts. To my understanding, that legislation passed. However, the DNR is now taking a stance that says that they still want us to pursue good faith effort with commercial fishermen before we can get permits to remove carp. So,
On that point, what would it take for us to get a commercial fishing license?
yeah, good question, Manager Miller. That I don't know if we can. My understanding of it is that commercial fishermen, they operate under a different class of permits than, say, the general public, which the district would fall under that category. But it's something I could look into a little bit more. Hopefully, what solution we have proposed here might be a way that or the district doesn't actually have to go out and obtain that type of licensing. And
Well, we could get the license and just contract with somebody else to perform the work.
and
There's only one license per, you have to knock out compete, and it's only so often. It's
correct. One other troubling factor too is we would then have to try to gain territory,
Okay.
and even if I were to obtain a license, they might give me a territory in northern Minnesota. I guess I'm not sure how that works, but
All right.
so
Sorry, I withdraw the question.
that's okay.
Grand Rapids branch.
Perfect. Road trip.
Good mileage though.
So the other factor is just communicating. They have their own business model. They've tended to historically just do their thing, and now they're getting broached with lots of comments, concerns, questions from organizations such as ourselves, where they're not required to pick up the phone and respond to us. So lots of challenges with working with commercial fishermen. Hopefully now I can paint a picture of maybe why that's come about and the solution to it. So 101 economics of commercial fishermen. Historically, commercial fishermen have these areas, but they only pick the productive lakes to go fish in. This minimizes their effort and expenses and maximizes their profits. The figure I've displayed here is just a hypothetical scenario where a commercial fisherman goes out 6 times to a given lake, and the variability of the carp still exists. It's not a guarantee that you're going to catch them, even if there's a lot there. However, by picking out these productive lakes over many efforts, they make money. Organizations such as ourselves say, come fish our lakes. The concerns with that is, one, that these lakes are unknown to commercial fishermen, which really boils down to there's unknown location of snags. So if I can direct your eyes to the beautiful image of Parley Lake, you can see out in the middle of the lake that there's a tree branch that sticks up. Closer to shore, there's a log that sticks out. Now, if these are out in the middle of the lake, actually below the surface of the water, we don't know that those exist, and if they put their nets in the water, begin to drag them under ice or other conditions, as soon as we run into a snag like that, it can, one, prevent the net from continuing on, or it can tear and release all the fish, on top of destroying their gear. So the other issues are, we convince them to come to lakes that have low carp abundance, and tell them to come when there's not a great market to sell the fish. And we're also an organization, an entity that's set up to prevent recruitment so that they come into these lakes, and if they're successful, they take carp out. If we're successful, the carp don't come back. So it's almost like we're competing with their business model where they want to understand lakes very well, and they want the carp to be there in high abundances all the time.
Jesus Christ.
So what this boils down to is the hypothetical scenario is when we tell them to come to our lakes is it's a big gamble, but more often than not, they're not making money, or in some cases, they could lose money. So the solution, first solution is remove the debris.
Dynamite.
If we can remove those logs, the lake will look like this. Perfect. This isn't intended to do over the entire lake. It's just localized in the areas where we intend to do the seining effort. So that way we're not displacing tons of habitat. But the second, which is more outlined in your draft scope packet, is this idea of implementing a fee and bounty program. The idea behind this is to reward them for their efforts of just trying to capture carp. The incentive then becomes if they actually catch the carp. So we can kind of scale that incentive to try to mimic a market for them to sell to. Some ways it seems like what I thought of as kind of a no-brainer situation. Why would you ever go into the market or a path that you can't make money? But contracts have not been set up this way historically, where commercial fishermen have said, oh, we're great at getting fish out, just tell us where to go. So they kind of say, we don't need money. They go in, their nets tear, issues arise. It's just created turmoil amongst different entities and kind of a bad reputation between commercial entities and not necessarily us, just organizations in general. So the next steps are we're currently working with the commercial fishermen to remove this localized debris. We don't view this as a very significant effort on their part, but it just requires them to do some sonar mapping of the area with sophisticated sonars, really map out those locations, and then hook into that debris and get it out of that area. We're also working with legal counsel and the fishermen to flesh out terms of the contract. I heard back from the commercial fisherman that I've been talking to today, and he's very appreciative of the contract kind of draft discussions that we've been having and just the kind of the process of increment and reward, so to speak. Ultimately, we're hoping to wrap this all together and bring to the board for authorization to execute at the next meeting. So with that, I'll thank you for your time and any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Winger. Questions, Manager Olson?
So when you remove a big tree like that, are you in a barge with a clamshell or something like that?
Manager Olson, great question. I want to see how exactly they go about doing it. My understanding is it might be more just like drive a boat, hook it with a chain. It might take a few passes to actually get it to hold, and then either lift it out, or if it's closer to the area that we want to seine, just kind of drag it out of that area. But in the discussions, I've also looked into and contacted the DNR about just the ability to, can we remove and move debris? And as long as it's not causing any significant impact to aquatic vegetation or emergent vegetation, there was no problem on their part. And so the idea is lift it more out of the water, move it to a different location, drop it, or if it's small enough, or pull it into the boat and off-site. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Is this covered by the Lessard Sam's grant? Okay. And did we have a number that we thought we'd have to pay for the fishing? I don't remember.
If I can call on Brown.
President White, managers, I should certainly know the number a little bit better than I do off the top of my head. But I think that what we're looking at this point with the barriers that have been constructed, the commitments to where we're installing aeration, and then the removals to date, I think we have about $200,000 left really specifically for removals. And so the first contract pass that Tom has drafted up would be sort of easily covered by the remaining dollars that are sort of slated specifically for these removals.
Okay, thank you. Manager Miller?
Are we breaking new ground, or is all the other watersheds that are removing carp coming up with these same kind of formats to solve the problem?
Yes, Manager Miller, great question. I'm not aware specifically of every other organization. In my previous employment at Wank, I worked quite closely with Shingle Creek Watershed Management Commission on a very similar concern. It's getting commercial fishermen to come. We started to work and propose a structure similar to this, which hopefully I've learned even more steps to include along the way that alleviate some of the issues we've had there. So the concept isn't necessarily completely new, but I guess for the district here and a few more steps and increments involved is new.
Great. Thank you.
Anything else, Mr. Langer? Thank you very much.
47 tons.
Can I ask one quick question?
Yes.
So since we're working with the commercial fishermen in our territory with this agreement, we're satisfying MAUD and
Not more.
or whoever wanted us to work within our current system?
It would mainly be the DNR.
The
So,
DNR, okay,
yeah,
sorry.
and we're through this all. We're actually working with two different commercial fishermen, because one commercial fisherman who has rights to the entire territory has said he only wants a couple of the lakes, again, his productive lakes, and he's willing to part with all his lakes that he doesn't know. So the new commercial fisherman is kind of a guy who wants to start up, who's been involved in the commercial fishing business and a helping hand to the guy who owns this territory. Yes.
Mr. Manager Loftus, MAUD's involvement was lobbying
Sorry.
for that
Okay.
law, which,
There's an obvious question that, the fishermen want the carp in the lake. And it seems to be conflicting goals. How do we address that, and I guess audit the activity to make sure that they're performing their services in our interest and not theirs?
I think that's the root of the question, Manager Miller, is we've got essentially a conflict of interest or competing business models. We're trying to eliminate carp, and that's literally their bread and butter, which is part of the proposed contract framework, is to create incentive for them to actually work with us, because under DNR law and rules, they have a monopoly over these lakes, and they're not obligated to do the work for us. So if you don't subsidize or create market incentive for them to go out and do the work, it's hard to find a workaround. We've come up with options in the past of creating a bid package or structure and giving them sort of right of first refusal, and that's a process that we've worked with the DNR. But that's the root of the issue, and I think it requires reform at the DNR level, which MAUD's proposed, to view carp management as ecological restoration versus balancing that against this commercial interest. And there isn't a clear solution yet.
If you remove the invasive carp, would a natural species populate, or was it just not the same quantity as, I mean, there's a huge market for these carp or something?
There are other fish that have a higher market price. There is thought and concern. So carp aren't the only fish species that can cause water quality or habitat concerns. There's a lot of other species, if their abundance gets to, it's not the, I guess I should back up, it's not the idea that carp are in the system. We're not trying, if we can get rid of every single carp, great, but that could be a pretty lofty goal. So the idea is we want to reduce them to a density where they don't cause that impact. There are native species that have the ability to have a water quality or habitat impact. but what research is out there is it's not to at the same density, it's not to the same magnitude of detriment.
The question is, if you manage carp to a manageable level, will they be replaced by a species that commercial fishermen have access to get and make money off of?
Yes.
So is that something we're in tune on then or not? Or is that still competing? Or we're not thinking 2 steps ahead, we're just...
It is a great question. That part of it is it's definitely an uncertainty with where that pool of energy goes in the fish food web. There is one avenue that it could go into other rough fish or fish that the commercial fishermen could target. But yeah, so in part too, it's a thought that it is good to build good rapport with these commercial fishermen, with the idea that even though we're cutting into their carp business, if it does provide opportunities elsewhere, but if we determine years down the road that we need another fish removed, it's in our best interest to have that rapport with them.
Looking at your bar graph, it'd be a long time before we'd be doing them out of business, though. Those big lakes. Manager Miller?
Well, you know, it's kind of like you got 2 or 3 fishermen, and you got hundreds of people that are impacted on each one of these lakes, or all these lakes, and then Minnetonka and everything. I mean, I don't get the politics of the thing. How does the fisherman have that much influence when it has a detrimental effect on all these taxpayers and voters? It just doesn't make any sense. I think the DNR is really should be called to order on this decision they made.
I would imagine it's such an invisible issue to most people.
Well, but think about the national parks or how they manage national forests. They're managed as a commercial product. And the DNR is in charge of recreation and, some commerce, and that's the limit of my knowledge about it. But I think the DNR has competing or sometimes conflicting charges on them also.
Well, I bet you all the people affected by the carp pay a lot more income tax than a fisherman, and vote a lot more. So I think somebody should point out the conflict here. It's it affects property values and water, obviously water quality and all the other.
We finally have something to add to that mod list of issues.
Mr. Whisker, your hand was up.
I was just going to say, I think those are all good questions, and when Tom comes back with the contract, we can be sure to frame those and provide more background on the actual policy framework, the legislation that was pushed, actually how it's rolling out. And we'll be able to answer questions about what fish species they have access to. I don't recall off the top of my head, and I sidebarred with Lewis and he didn't recall either, but I think the commercial fishing licenses, they don't give them license to go out there and commercially net muskie, bluegill, those sorts of things. So it's really targeted at these rough fish issues, and I think we'll confirm that, and we'll talk about the legislative pushes and sort of the policy issues when we bring the contract back, so it's a little bit clearer.
It's interesting.
Manager Robbins?
You know, I thought we were armed with University of Minnesota research into how to get rid of carp. And so we've gotten involved in barriers and in aeration. Is there, are there other things that we should be looking at besides fishing?
Dropping dynamite in the lakes. That'd avoid the fishing issue.
Mr. Whisker?
Well, yeah, dynamite's an option.
I'm going to Rosemary Wood the tape on this one.
Right, so we have this great science from the University of Minnesota that's pointed us in the direction of this 3-pronged management strategy that Tom outlined, and we're trying to prevent how they move around the system so the adult carp don't have access to their nursery areas where they lay the eggs and then create recruitment or young carp. So we're preventing them from moving to the nursery areas. We're aerating the nursery areas, and that's the recruitment piece that we have in place. And then you have to tackle the other side of the equation, which is removing the adults. And there's dynamite, a variety of fishing techniques, and then there's chemical control, which is non-selective and kills everything in the lake. And that's been done by watersheds and other management agencies using rotenone and other things. So we've chosen to go through more selective targeted removal through all the techniques that Tom outlined, and because of the volume or density of carp in certain locations, we need to use commercial fishermen seine because of the legal structure. So that's something that we need to tackle and solve so that we can get them working for us to make measurable progress. We are making measurable progress, but more and faster.
You did forget the technique of removing all the water in the lake. Which is
Right, the drawdown.
Yeah, that's the Albert
It's also
Lee
relatively
model.
non-selective.
Bush lake.
One other idea is the fact that the barriers are in place, and if carp can't recruit, they live a long time, but eventually if they can't replenish their population, it might be 40, 50, 60 years from now, but we could hit the goal of no carp.
That's how long they live, 60 years.
Same with us.
So
Same as us.
we'll get more on this. We've probably beaten it to death right now.
Well,
One more,
you know,
Andrew.
it's interesting, and I mean, this is, you know, kind of science and politics mixed here.
We're all fascinated.
How about those kids that got the carp and then sold them to a hog farmer? And were they violating state law?
Well, yeah, I've got the background on that one. I wouldn't say they're violating state law, but I'm fairly certain they weren't out pulling DNR permits to do the removals, and it might not have fallen under the category of competing with the commercial fishermen. They were doing the stream trapping, essentially. They had a barrier in a stream channel. The carp were migrating through there. They had them boxed in, and they were sort of hauling them out, which is one of the techniques we've used with other fishing vendors.
Plus, they got an award from us.
Before my time.
One big discrepancy between the commercial fishing license too, it does allow them to sell fish for profit, whereas say any research or any removal that the district, we can't keep those fish and turn around and sell it for a profit. That's why a lot of it's either donated to people that are going under the assumption that they're not taking our donation and selling, or it's going to organics recycling facilities, things of that nature.
Big farms.
Thank you, Mr. Langer.
Yes.
Administrator's report, Mr. Whisker.
I can't top that.
No. Carp is always
I had a long list.
avid discussion.
It just doesn't seem worth it. I do have a few things. Tom stole my thunder. So, an update on Big Island. The Orono City Council approved a Minnesota Outdoor Recreation Grant Agreement on October 21st. That grant provides $200,000 for improvements to the Big Island Nature Park, including some of the things that you've seen before as Laura's brought those forward and framed how they fit within the easement authority. Things like ADA trail, interpretive signage, pavilion improvements, those sorts of things. Just to catch you up, the city and the 501c3 that they have formed, which I believe is called Big Island Legacy, have to provide $200,000 in match to actually leverage this grant that's been awarded, with at least $80,000 coming from the city of Orono. Big Island Legacy, the nonprofit, so far has raised $60,000. And so that's where they stand. They've approved this grant agreement. They're eligible for the $200,000. They've got to provide $200,000 in match. 80 has to come from the city. They've raised 60 through this nonprofit. So that's sort of the general status of funding for park improvements. There's a design review, another design review scheduled between the city and district staff next month, so we can report back on sort of what their next level thinking is. As you recall, the city is required to address per the feedback that we've given them, just long-term maintenance for the park, access, some of our maintenance concerns, and then we've, on a number of different occasions, asked them to address concerns from days gone past regarding vandalism. And that might be a nice segue. President White had keyed me into a recent news article and city discussion regarding vandalism out at one of their more popular parks. I think it's called Lurton Dog Park. And police chief, council have had some consideration given to temporarily closing that park while they make some decisions about reinvestment and what to do about preventing vandalism. That's a park that's on, obviously, mainland, has a lot of eyes on it. So it's something that they're thinking about that park, and I think provides some relevance to the concerns that have been raised in the past about Big Island. So we'll be having that conversation with them going forward. I saw it in the news, and President White and I were invited, but unable to attend, that the City of Wayzata officials, the mayor, city manager, and some staff recently hosted the Senate Capital Investment Committee. That was on October 24th. And they were out walking around Wayzata lakefront profiling their lake effect project, their 10-year plan, for which they're seeking state bonding for half of the total $20 million cost of next year's bonding bill. Main focus of that project that Wayzata has been pushing for a number of years is their 1,200-foot boardwalk that'll connect sort of west and east sides of downtown, the depot to the historic section Foreman House. And then in the newspaper, Senator Osmek, who's a member of the Capital Investment Committee, expressed his public support for the project and talked about introducing a bill in favor of the work. So that's something that we're tracking just because we've been involved in it to date, and it involves the lakefront. Anna presented today at the Minnesota Park and Rec Association conference that was held in Brooklyn Park. She sat on a panel that was titled, "Money Doesn't Grow on Trees, So Where Does It Come From?" It featured a series of speakers that were profiling creative, innovative, or unconventional funding approaches to park construction and maintenance. District's presentation profiled the value of integrating water and how that unlocks potential insight and also different funding streams. So we're able to talk about park dedication use and the Victoria project, Arden Park, Cottageville, and how that opens up different grant streams for park planners. Other panel presenters were City Manager for Chaska, Assistant City Manager Shakopee, and that whole panel was facilitated by the former City Manager from Victoria, Lori Hokanen. So she's the one that plugged us into that. And it sounds like that went really well, and we had good attendance and some questions afterwards. Water levels, I think everybody knows this already, but 2019 is still the wettest year to date. We have 39.28 inches of precip. It's about 11.25 inches over average, so a substantial amount. Due to dry weather, Minnetonka is not doing too bad. It's steadily dropped around 4.5 inches over the last couple weeks. We're right around 929.03. We've got to get it down another 5 inches to 928.6 before we close the dam. And over the past 2 weeks, like I said, it's dropped around 4.5. Dam discharges at 150, and then down around the Hiawatha gauge, it's up at 240. Nokomis, the weir was opened again on October 25th. The idea is to keep that open the rest of the year into the winter. Right now, the lake's doing okay. It's at 815.3, so it's about